Aphorism 201. It is evident that man's vital force, when encumbered with a chronic disease which it is unable to overcome by its own powers, instinctively adopts the plan of developing a local melody on some external part solely for this object, that by making and keeping in a diseased state this part which is not indispensable to human life, it may thereby silence the internal disease which otherwise threatens to destroy the vital organs and to deprive the patient of life, and that it may thereby, so to speak, transfer the internal disease to the vicarious local affection, and as it were draw it thither. The presence of the local affection thus silences for a time the internal disease through, without being able either to cure it or to diminish it materially. The local affection, however, is never anything else than a part of the general disease, but a part of it increased all in one direction by the organic vital force and transferred to a less dangerous external part of the body in order to allay the internal ailment. But as has been said, by this local symptom that silences the internal disease, so far from anything being gained by the vital force towards diminishing or curing the whole malady, the internal disease, on the contrary, continues in spite of it gradually to increase, and nature is constrained to enlarge and aggravate the local symptom always more and more in order that it may still suffice as a substitute for the increased internal disease, and may still keep it under. Old ulcers on the legs get worse as long as the internal sora is uncured. The chancre enlarges as long as the internal syphilis remains uncured. The figwarts increased and grow while the psychosis is not cured, whereby the latter is rendered more and more difficult, to cure, just as the general internal disease continues to increase as time goes on. Explanation. It is clearly seen that the man's vital force gets damaged or stressed out with internal chronic disease when it is unable to overcome the chronic disease by its own powers instinctively. It adopts the way of developing a local melody on some external part of the body. In this way, solely purpose of this is to drive the diseased state to the part which is not very important to human life or its not vital organ. By directing the internal disease to the local part, it silences the internal disease, which otherwise may threatens to destroy the vital organs and may deprive the life of patient. So here we can say that vital force transfers the internal disease to the vicarious local affection, otherwise it may threaten the life of the patient. So the presence of local affection thus silences the internal disease through, without being able to cure or to diminish it disease. Local affection, however, is nothing else but it is part of the general internal disease. Part of this internal disease is increased in one direction by the organic vital force. Internal disease is transferred to a less dangerous part external of the body in order to save the vital organs and in order to diminish the internal disease. But it is said that the local symptoms that silences the internal disease, even though vital force gets anything, for example remedy to diminish or to cure the whole internal disease. On the contrary, local symptoms continue to aggravate and enlarge more and more. That may be due to or as a reflection of the increased internal disease, and it still keep it under control or directed to one external part. Old ulcers on the legs get worse as long as the internal psora is uncured. The chancre enlarges as long as the internal syphilis remains uncured. The fig warts increased and grows while the psychosis also remain uncured. Effects or latter effects are more difficult to cure because the general internal disease continues to grow as time goes on. Footnote of 116. The issues of the old school practitioners do something similar as artificial ulcers on external parts. They silence some internal chronic diseases, but only for very short time, as long as they cause a painful irritation to which the sick organism is not used without being able to cure them. But on the other hand, they weaken and destroy the general health much more than is done by most of the metastasis affected by the instinctive vital force. Explanation of footnote. The same effects and same issues are from the old school treatment. For example, if artificial ulcers on external parts, they will treat it locally and thereby they silence some internal chronic diseases, but only for a short time without being able to cure them. Apart from that, on the other hand, they weaken and destroy the general health much more than the damage done by most of the metastasis effects by the instinctive vital force. When vital force instinctively metastasis, the disease, local affection at distant parts, etc., will be in favor of the life of an organism, while metastases developed by drugs are dangerous for life of an organism.